Today I'm going to talk about a spiritual path called Taoism from China, and I'm going to describe it and explain it as I understand it in my Western terms. And I would basically call it going with the flow.
Greg and Jane Hamilton Parker are the world's most psychic couple. Can they speak to the dead and bring messages of hope in these troubled times? Join them for an evening of mystical talks, world predictions, and spirit messages.
So there's this religion that's thousands of years old that came out of ancient China. And I suppose it's a bit unfair to call it a religion, really, because it's more of a spiritual philosophy, a way of thinking, a way of describing the world. And you can find this same concept in lots of different paths, and I'll describe some of those to you as we go along. But Taoism was around about the same time as Confucius walked the earth. But the man that developed the idea of Taoism was a man called Lao Tzu, who was the typical Chinese sage. You know, he was, the pictures of him has a big long beard and a very wise looking man. And he's become almost like a legendary sort of character, really. We don't even know if he ever existed, come to that. But he talked about this concept in a book called the Tao Te Ching, which was the idea of that there's this sort of impossible to describe state called the Tao. Now the Tao means, it translates, like lots of Chinese words, they translate in multiple ways. But the Tao translates as the way. So it's like finding the way in some respects, the way. They say it can't really be described because even that doesn't describe it at all. In fact, in the Tao Te Ching, it says the Tao that can be described is not the eternal Tao. The name that can be spoken is not the eternal name. So this idea of the Tao, or Tao, depending what Chinese translation you use, it's something that nobody can describe. And so someone like me talking about it now is almost lying, because, you know, how can we understand it? Because it can't be put into words. But we obviously have to make an attempt to do this. And this is why when you approach these things, you have to approach it with a sort of humility, a certain modesty, which are very highly valued qualities within Taoism. So basically it means this idea, I've got to explain it as I understand it. The Chinese talk about this idea of Wu Wei, which is the idea of going with the flow of life. So first of all, let me explain what I think the Tao could be described as. Now, if we were to try to describe nirvana, for example, the Buddhist concept of nirvana, there's not a single word that could describe it, you know? Same too if you take the Japanese equivalent of satori, you know, there's no word that can describe it, you know. Similarly, if we talk about samadhi within Hinduism, you cannot describe these infinite states. You know, here we go already. We start talking. How can we use it? What words can we use? Infinite, immeasurable, absolute. But then that seems just like some abstract concept. Could we describe it as light? Could we describe it as love? Could we describe it as endless absolute peace? Could we describe it as the ineffable? You know, no word comes near it. We can describe what it's not, but it's beyond what we call dualism. It's beyond this world of the 10,000 things. You know, it's beyond all existence, and it's beyond even thought. You know, a thought cannot embrace it because it's in a state that is no thought. So when we talk about the Tao, we're in the same realm, because I think that it's almost, it's like a person has to first find enlightenment before they can understand the Tao. And perhaps one's also got to understand the Tao before you can understand enlightenment. But it's like, to me, it's like the idea of the point, the absolute holy point in every experience we can have, in every moment, that there is almost like the echoes of eternity that are here. There's almost in every situation that we can possibly know, good and bad, in any situation, whether it's pleasant or unpleasant, there's always the perfect point. It's a bit like in science where you have the perfect point of equilibrium, the center of gravity, the point that where it all meets, where there is absolute balance. And we can find that in every situation we encounter. It's particularly expressed in nature. Nature has, it's like nature just does it, it's just happens, I mean, if you think about how light falls upon an object or a something, or a flower or something like that, it's like all the work's done. If you've ever been a painter like I have in the long distant past, and you try to work out how the light lands on something, you've got to think, well, you've got a light source here, you've got a light source there, you've got reflected light here, and this, that, and the other, and it takes forever to work it out, and it never looks right, But nature does it just like that, effortlessly. So there's this idea with the idea of coming to this perfect point, of it being effortless, So it's like nature expresses this. We see it particularly in the flow of water, for example. One of the great Taoist books is the Yi Jing, or the I Ching, you could also pronounce it. But the Yi Ching, the Oracle of the Yi Ching, which I use a lot with my work as a medium, and when people want me to make predictions and things. But the Yi Jing has one of the hexagrams there that talks about water. It's the abysmal, but it shows how water can overcome any hardness. If you're faced with difficulties, if you're faced with rocks in front of your way, water will just flow on. It has no fear of falling down the great cliffs as a waterfall, or filling up deep spaces to become a lake, or flowing like a river and just coming to its goal. It moves, and yet it's non-action. It's not, there's like action because it moves, and yet it is no action at the same time. And this, in some ways, as a symbol, embraces a closeness to this idea that action and non-action can be the same, right? Now, in the West, all of us, me, I'm particularly bad at this, always we set goals for ourselves, don't we? We always have ambitions. We live by deadlines. I worked for years in I had an advertising agency, and we would work by a timesheet, and every moment of our day was divided up, and we had to achieve something and do this, do that, 15 minutes to this client, 15 minutes to that, half an hour to that client, you came away from it thinking, where am I? I've lost it. That was a complete opposite of this idea of flowing with things. And haven't you found that in your own life, sometimes you can try really, really, really hard on something and you get nowhere? And other times you can just relax and let it be, and it like happens. And I particularly learnt this in my experiences in India too, with this idea that, doing pujas and things like this to help the way, as it were, to help the path, to remove obstacles. Once we can take this idea that once we can remove an obstacle, then it just opens up to us. And sometimes we're just banging our heads against the wall. Because many people in their nature go against this whole idea of going with the flow of life. They want to control things. Everybody has a tendency to do that. Some people can be absolute control freaks, and it becomes almost ridiculous. But we take life so seriously, and we lose that connection that Taoism teaches us, that when we look to nature and we look to places with great silence, that we can, in a very, very subtle way, begin to connect with that underlying harmony of existence that the Taoism tries to express. This is why it's so connected with the beauties of nature, with the wonders of the mists running across the mountainsides, or the rivers flowing through the forests, and the simple sounds of birds calling and things like that. In all of this, we get a sense of the underlying beauty and harmony and effortlessness of the unfolding of existence. So it takes us far away from our foolishness, perhaps, in our endless attempts to achieve and cause ourselves so much worry and stress in our lives, you know. You could even call the Tao, I would even think of it in a similar way, as being like the Indian concept of Dharma, you know, that there's an underlying cosmic sort of social order, as it were, a truth, a satya, a truth underlying existence. And I often think also that we can get in touch with the same concepts through the idea of our conscience too, because our conscience knows, you know, it knows what's right to do in any situation, but something in us is always resisting. And I think also in each of us we have an innate intuition that we've lost touch with very much in this age of Kali Yuga, as the Indians describe the age we're in now. But we've lost touch with this idea that we can achieve things effortlessly. You know, we can bring things into our life without effort. Now, I'm not talking about some of these silly sort of concepts about, you know, endlessly, I demand abundance, abundance must come to me, I deserve to be rich, all those sort of thought ideas that you send out a thought and it comes back to the universe abundance. It don't work like that. It works by understanding that we have everything we want right now. You know, everything that we need, everything in this present moment, in every moment of existence, there is the enlightened state, the state of awakening, you know. So like I said before, perhaps the two are so connected. What happens, for example, once a person has become enlightened? What happens to the enlightened person? You know, you've achieved enlightenment. What happens? Do you disappear? No, you don't disappear. You continue to exist, but you exist in a state of total harmony with what I suppose we could call the Tao. And remember, this is my interpretation of this. And like Lao Tzu says, you know, he who knows speaks not. He who speaks not knows. You know, it's the you know, it's the concept of we cannot ever really put this into words, but I know it when I look at nature. And I sometimes feel it when I'm in the right state of meditation, for example. And I'm sure you do too. We all have those moments, sometimes of an almost oceanic feeling to existence. The absolute glorious splendour of existence comes to us. And we don't know, where do we get that feeling from? You know, sometimes the beauty of nature particularly brings us to this idea of it just happens, you know. Wu Wei, it's the non-action, the flow. You know, even athletes get it sometimes when they get into the flow, when they suddenly find they're in a state. A friend of mine who's a boxer, or had been a boxer, you said he used to get into a point, you know, where it all just happened. You know, it wasn't like he was doing the actions. They go beyond the point of total exhaustion until they completely can't take another step, and then bang. Not only is it a second wind, but it's described as something of almost a cosmic proportions, you know. But it might be to do with the chemicals in the brain, but it's also perhaps also connected with this idea that there's a great connection point in existence, you know, that we can make things happen, not by willing it. It's beyond will. It comes more, I think, from the power of acceptance of our life and opening ourselves. And I think ultimately having the power not only to flow, because in order to flow with things, in order to roll with the punches, in order to go with life as it is without question, we have to have the courage to let go. And how many have that courage to let go at any point in life? We're always clinging on to the bank. We're not prepared to let go and go with the stream of existence. So I think if we find this, life becomes less threatening to us, because we've accepted that we can just flow with it. Ultimately, if we can accept death, for example, if we can accept our death and we just accept that we're going to flow one day into death, and we can accept that in the very core of our being, and then life won't hold us so hard, and we can perhaps start to enjoy it more and be more maybe see the cosmic joke of it all, you know, and start to see that life is actually not to be taken quite so seriously, that life is actually a game that we can play. And I think all this links into the idea of going with the flow. And I think you can particularly find it in meditation, when you allow yourself just to go with the flow. You know, so much meditation is hard concentration and focus and bringing the brain back. But actually, the highest levels of meditation in many respects is just being able to flow with it, to be who you are, be what you are. Just acceptance of the great underlying dharma of existence, the underlying way that is expressed in the idea of the Tao, the idea that, you know, the enlightenment and the non-enlightenment are actually the same, that the world of form is actually just a manifestation of the world of non-form. You know, so it's all about this idea of letting go a bit more, of pushing aside perhaps our rational mind, of coming back to this wonderful idea, this philosophy of the flow. And I think it can bring us a lot closer to true happiness. Check out our website for more stuff. You can book psychic readings with us and find out about our public events, or watch our fantastic movie called Mystic Journey to India. It's a mind-boggling adventure that's now showing on Amazon Prime. And if you want to learn more, you can find out about my books and courses. Check out Messages from the Universe that reveals the ancient secrets of existence, or read my book called Psychic School to discover and enhance your own psychic skills. Or how about What to Do When You're Dead, my book about the afterlife and what it's like. All this plus lots more, lots of new articles and videos, all on my fascinating website.